Happy Sunday, everybody. Today we are looking at the Atlas SD50. All right, so before we jump into this, a little bit of backstory. If anybody's watched me for a period of time, I am an EMD fanboy. I love most all of the EMD engines, and when you start progressing into the newer, SD50, definitely into the SD60, SD70, wide cab kind of starts to become a thing. Not so much on the SD50s, but there's something about the old school cab that just really looks cool, and maybe it's because of the love of the SD40s and whatnot, but I have a soft spot in my heart for any engine with a cab like this. So I'm always looking for good prototypes to put on my layout, and I came across this CSX quite a while ago, and I thought it would be a good buddy engine for my AC6000 that I run pretty regularly. I have a little bit of a riddled past with Atlas, but this engine is not going to be a total departure from the norm. I have some relatively serious gripes with this, but it is an indicator that they have some capability to build some stuff that I think very possibly could be a really good standard going forward, depending on how they move forward with, going from the Rev 1 DCC ready engines into the Rev 2s, and moving forward into maybe something different in the future. This particular engine is a Revision 1 or Version 1 DCC ready frame. We'll take a look at that when we pull the body off. I have some issues with some of the things on it, but I did buy this model used, full disclosure. I don't think you can buy these new currently. But there are quite a few of them out there, and so, as always, I'm working through some of my back stock so I can compare them to some of my newer engines as we review, and this is one of those engines I wanted to kind of get out of the way. Something that Atlas does that I really like is on some of their older engines, they have pretty nice detail, and that makes me hopeful for their re-releases going forward, and I really do hope that they up their quality a little bit, because a good re-release of an engine like this could really add a lot to anyone's layout. So let's go ahead and take a look at this visually, see the finite details, and then talk about some things that maybe they could improve going forward and some of the issues I've had with it. Alrighty, so now that we're pulled in close here, something that Atlas always gets right, and I talk about all the time, is painted handrails and safety steps. Right on, that's awesome feature. I love that they do that. Something about this engine that is probably not correct is the color. I have this, this Kato back here, and I have that SD40 back behind it that is made by Intermountain, and I have them on here for a specific reason, because the color profile between the Atlas and those don't exactly match. Now, I'm not a CSX guy like I am a BN or BNSF guy, so a little bit of color difference isn't as big a deal to me, but I have to say that all of my other engines are kind of a lighter color. This has a darker, richer tone to it, and I actually kind of like the way this looks better. Judging by the pictures I've looked at, this is probably less accurate than those other engines, but honestly, I really like the yellow and the darker, more vibrant gray that's on this. So, personal preference, but probably not actually prototypical. A lot of the molded in detail on this is pretty decent. I'm going to pull back a little bit, and we're going to talk about some of the fitment issues that some of the newer engines have that this doesn't. But let's just quick do a drive-by here. Something I wish it had a little better detail on the fans. They're kind of shallow, but with a little bit of wash, those could really stand out. The The radiator grills on the side of this are superb compared to some of the other ones I've seen out there. They have nice depth and good molding. All of the doors on this are very nicely molded in as well. CSX is a good paint scheme for seeing some of this stuff. The grays really pop out well, and you can tell on these engines that there is a good paint coverage. The recesses and the lines of the doors, the gray can really show thin spots just because of the way it is, and this you can really tell has good paint coverage. So that's a nice little bit. The walkway tread is acceptable as always. As we get closer to the rear here, excuse the dust and little pieces of hair. Again, working layout, these engines get used constantly. The fan detail is slightly subpar anymore, but this is an older, not necessarily vintage, but 10 plus years old type engine. So one of the details, if you didn't see that there, is although I did buy this model used, there was no light cover in it. The kind of shroud that goes over the decoder to help block some of the light. However, I kind of looked into this engine a little bit and saw some other people that had it, and they definitely get a lot of cab light bleed. Now, I don't know if they just didn't come with a deflector, but going forward in the future, if they re-release this, it would be nice to see less light bleed in the cab. This particular engine has, I believe, a Digitrax decoder in it. I would like to try it with the TCS. However, I'm still working on building up enough money to convert all of my engines over to TCS, but be that as it may, it is... Well, I better stop there. The lights on this are acceptable. I think they would be brighter with the TCS. We'll talk more about the decoder in a separate section, but let's zoom in here and actually talk about some of the fitment that I think this does right and other Atlas engines do wrong. All right, I got my flashlight out here just to give you an idea of what the truck detail looks like. Decent, although plasticky. A little bit of flat black paint and some rust would really bring these out. Not as detailed, in my opinion, as, say, a Kato truck, but they do look pretty decent. They do not hide the, right there, the nubbin up top, the actual pickup very well. But, as you can see, the truck runs relatively close to the body, and when sitting on the layout, it is pretty close to the underframe of the model, and it adds the proper illusion to the model, as opposed to here is the 8-40 that I complained about in my review. Notice the coupler height is relatively similar. This is a curve, don't mind that. But even at this higher angle, you can see there is quite a bit of monster truck effect under there. You can see the body on this is probably substantially higher than that one. I don't believe they're that way in real life. They should pretty well match up. So Atlas is capable of building subframes that allow the trucks to be up underneath the body properly and give them a nice scale look. So that is one of those things about the Dash 8s that I'm really not excited about, and I wish they would have fixed with that re-release. That kind of gives me hope for these engines that they will look a bunch nicer. Just do a quick drive-by again. We'll take a look at the tank as long as we're down here, and I got the flashlight out. Painted fill points, that's a nice touch. And the rear trucks are also nice and tight to the frame. You can see the pickups come across and touch the wheel pickups. They're relatively close up there. They are hard to see on the layout. I wish that those would disappear. There are ways to do that. Kato does it perfectly, but for the most part, they're hard to see, so we will give them the pass for the moment. All right, let's go ahead and pull the cover off of this and start talking frame, decoder, and what maybe would be a good change. So if you're unfamiliar with Atlas's, their revision 1 DCC ready frames look as such. You have to slightly split the model and put the decoder in the center, or completely take it apart, split the frame, and then reassemble. That is generally what you do with these style of decoders, because the motor leads are actually soldered onto the decoder. There are different types that don't require the soldering. However, the finickiness of these motors and pickups, I would recommend soldering them if you can. That is the frame from the right side, and we can take a look at the left here. I do very much like some of these older frames just because they are easy to service, as you know, opposed to some new, more modern sound engines. All you have to do to service these is pretty simple. A little bit of grease on each of the worm gears that are readily accessible. On the bottom of the trucks, you can get to access points for the gears. A little bit of grease there. And then some of your desired, I forget what it's called. I think it is Atlas. It's not their conductor lube, but I have some other lubricant from Atlas. Just a dot of each, kind of by the bushings, or this might even be ball bearings. Judging by the noise it makes, I'm guessing it's bushings. Right by the flywheels next to the motor, just to keep everything running nice and smooth. Some people put them in the U-joints in these. I do not. I try to stay away from that. Any model with U-joints that connect the flywheels to the main trucks, I try to keep it dry if possible. The slip joint that is built in there wears prematurely, in my opinion. If you add oil or grease to that situation, it just attracts more dust. The plastic is generally relatively self-lubricating, so I tend to stay away from that. But I do like these old models for their simplicity, and they're easy to maintain. So great for the beginner, awesome for the intermediate because it's just less maintenance that you have to do. One thing that you will run into with this particular model is it is rather finicky with the pickups, and I find this basically with all of my Atlas models. I do regularly put oil on the wheel pickups, each of the interfaces where the wheel touches the copper that runs the side there, as well as the interface between the frame and that, with a little bit of Atlas conductor lube. And when I say a little bit, I mean a little bit. A small drop goes a long ways for making this run a little bit better. But despite it being a DCC ready model, I find that this is very finicky with track. It might also be the axle wheel or the Atlas wheels. They all kind of have the same look. They're kind of bulky. There's plenty of wheel wear on here, so you should be through any of the blackening on here. But yeah, I do have pickup issues with this. It does struggle through turnouts as well. I've tried a lot of things. I can't seem to get it out of it. It might just be decoder related too. If I was to get a higher quality decoder in this, something with a little bit of capacitance or a keep alive, it might make this thing a much better runner. Okay, I went ahead and popped the body back on, mainly because it is, I think, part of the mechanism that holds some of the down pressure on the pickups, makes it a little more reliable. With the body off, it can be very finicky, but slow speed control is acceptable for a DCC model that's pretty basic. It can creep along pretty slowly. I don't have precise control on this DCS51. I can't just set it at one speed step. I'm using kind of a potentiometer to increase the speed, so it's a little more finicky than, say, my other system, but it will creep right along if you want it to. This might be difficult. I'm going to go ahead and set the microphone next to the machine. See if we can get this here. At relatively slow speeds, it is acceptably quiet. However, when you start to get up to higher speeds, you definitely start to hear when you get up to higher speeds, you definitely start to hear a lot of motor whine, and that is a bit of a killer for me. Now, these are not as bad as like the GP30s and whatnot that I have, but anything over on layout, over speed step, 10 to 15 at a 126, you definitely start to hear the motor whine. So acceptable at really low speeds, and that can be okay in some situations, but this is not a high-speed engine. It is just, frankly, too loud for layout work at that point. I really hate to say this, but Atlas does a really bad job with their motors at this higher speed stuff, and it's getting better on some of their new releases for sure, but these older models, they are not quiet machines. So if that's something that you want, and it's something that I think is necessary for a good model in N scale, is a good quiet running motor. Some of that could possibly be decoder, but I've had quite a bit of issues in the past with Atlas motors being relatively loud, so I don't know if that's all of it. So keep that in mind. If it's something that you absolutely desire as a good quiet running engine, these are probably not going to be a good addition to your layout at that point. At slow speeds, though, I will say that this engine has a decent amount of pulling power. Atlas wheels, like I said, they all kind of look the same. They don't seem to have the same amount of traction as, say, some others. And I don't know if it is what they're made out of, what they're coated with. I tend to notice this with a lot of my Atlas engines, is they tend to start slipping before other engines do. The SD50 back here, that they basically weigh about the same amount when you have them. I weighed them. They're pretty close to the same. This has more pulling power than this. Now, some of that comes down to the back EMF, that this is a lock pilot in it. This is a Digitrax. I don't know if it has back EMF. I'm pretty sure this is Digitrax, but you can definitely tell when back EMF is turned on in an engine. This will eventually just kind of start to move slowly. Most back EMF engines, especially not well, it's really hard to get a back EMF system, I guess I should say, properly, super well calibrated, especially in N scale. So there's always a bit of a jerk that happens before the engine starts moving, and that's part of the system, trying to find that start voltage, and it always goes past it by a little bit and then comes back down to it. So you can almost always tell when an engine has back EMF enabled, because that slow speed, little jolt when it first starts is definitely a noticeable thing. Now, really high end, back EMF systems, people that have taken a lot of time to tune it can get that taken out of. I generally don't much care unless it's on one of my GP engines, and I'm working on getting some better GP engines, but mostly I run my 6-axle stuff as road units, so you're not stopping and starting all the time. They're also generally in multiple engine consists. You get 2 or 3 engines hooked up together, that little bump happens at different periods for all of them. So it kind of takes out that initial jolt, and it looks more seamless. Also, a good amount of acceleration tends to take that out as well. This particular decoder does not work real well with acceleration. It doesn't seem to have the effect that some of the other engines get with acceleration. So probably a knock on the decoder, but the Atlas motors definitely have some finickiness built into them. So this is a little bit less of a review because these are not made anymore. And I think Atlas is kind of going through all of their old stock and rebuilding stuff in Rev 2 and then giving them sound capabilities, which if I was Atlas, that's an excellent idea. A lot of these engines, a lot of their molding is excellent. You put quality motors in them and lock sound, and you really have some premium products. And I have a lot of hope for Atlas that they finally get this right. I ended up getting an SD50E not too long ago. It was dead in the box, so another knock on me for Atlas. I really struggle with them, but I really like some of their models, and they have some things that you just can't get anywhere else. So I really hope that they get this stuff figured out. But these can be found right about $100, a lot of times with DCC for $100. So if you're hunting on eBay and you can find one of these for that, it's actually not too bad of a deal. Just keep in mind, it's probably more suited to be kind of a local engine or a switcher type engine. I would probably recommend taking the time and removing the pickups and just solid wiring, your pickup here to the frame. These newer engines that have wired pickups definitely have less dropouts. And some of it is, yes, the lock sound systems in it or the lock pilot systems. As we move forward, if this became a revision 2, lock pilot decoders are $30. And that is something that isn't brought up a whole lot because TCS decoders, although they are excellent, generally run about $50. NCE are $30 to $32, and Digitrax run about $40. These new lock pilot decoders, the Micro Direct, I think is what they're called, what's in this right here, they're much easier to install in these revision 2 frames, and they're cheaper than most any other decoder out there. And to be quite honest with you, they are on par with the TCS that they compete with. ESU does not have good drop-ins for, say, Kato's and some other ones that are that affordable yet. So TCS is still kind of my standard for those. But for the Atlas style frames, like Intermountain engines, there's a few others that use the version 2, like this has, the Sound Ready engines. That is an excellent deal and totally changes the game. And I think Atlas should take advantage of that and offer some really premium products. Anyway, sounds like my kid's waking up from his nap, so I better cut this short as quick as I can here. But short story long, decent engine. If you can get under that $100 price point, especially with any sort of DCC system, I think it's an okay deal. Not as good as the Kato, but it has its place. Standard cab, which is cool. I think it would be an excellent mid-engine in a consist. You don't have to have the lights on. The cab wouldn't have to run that way. And honestly, like a second unit for like a local, run an SD40 in front of it, this in the second position, I think it would be a really cool consist for doing kind of local or maybe even some large switching work. So, all right, this Monday I will see you for a little more of work on our review layout. Wednesday, I've got some good information on that Kato we're putting the lock sound in. And Friday, I think we're going to finally take a look at the Microtrains 25th or 30th anniversary. I forget, Montana Rail Link car. Sad to say that they're disappearing. I'm a Montana guy, so it's sad to see a local branch leaving. But we'll go ahead and review that 60-foot box car. And then, I will see you that Sunday for the review. And should be cool. So if you don't see me at all next week, have a good Turkey Day, and I will see you later. Bye now.